Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this 9th day of Christmas. We are celebrating the life and reflecting on the many contributions of Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, as you know, of course, recently deceased, and among those whose lives have been profoundly affected by the life and ministry of Joseph Ratzinger. Our next guest, and all of our guests today, this is the highest-ranking churchman we will have on with us, and I say highest-ranking because that means he was ordained for the Diocese of San Diego, and it's pretty hard to get higher than that. But he also served 7 years in the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, which is the Church's highest canonical court. In 2002, Pope John Paul II appointed then Monsignor Cordileone as auxiliary bishop here in the Diocese of San Diego. He went on to be the bishop, the fourth bishop of Oakland, California, and in 2012 he was appointed Archbishop of San Francisco. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome. Happy to be with you.
So when you were in Rome there all those years with the Apostolic Signatura, did you have an opportunity to have personal encounters with Joseph Ratzinger?
Not during those years too much. No, I would more like see him in passing, but I didn't have any kind of official encounters with him at that time. I had met him before as a priest, and then, of course, later on as a bishop a couple of times.
And was it he that appointed you the bishop in Oakland?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was Pope Benedict appointed me to Oakland and then appointed me to San Francisco after that.
And we've had so many folks on talking about his many contributions. Maybe I could just start by asking you about what his time as bishop, as cardinal, as pope meant for the life of the church. What is your sense of what all of that meant?
It's hard to know where to start with that. He is a towering figure of a theologian with an amazing breadth and depth of knowledge and insight into our Catholic faith tradition, but also not just like his understanding of it, but his ability to communicate it. He had an amazing ability to summarize volumes of wisdom and teaching in like small pithy phrases, and so many of his writings are writings that are accessible to just about anyone. So it's a brilliant theologian, but then knows how to communicate it. He, of course, he has a great legacy in terms of the liturgy and all of his writings on the liturgy and the way he modeled that with his own life, and him understanding that that's at the heart of who we are as Catholic. That informs everything we believe as Catholics and how we live. So he understood the centrality of that. We can think of his Wednesday audiences. He gave that series of talks on the Fathers of the Church. Of course, being a specialist in St. Augustine, he understood the Fathers also as a force for Christian unity. It's the common roots especially with the East. There are so many things to say about the legacy that he's leaving the Church for us.
Can I ask you about that last one, Excellency? Because I know from recent conversations that you and I had that you have a good friendship with the Orthodox up there in San Francisco. And I wonder, do you find that is informed by the work of Benedict, that friendship?
It's certainly helpful. Of course, Pope Paul VI started that with the mutual lifting of the excommunication. But I think Pope Benedict's vision of, the early fathers has been a sort of a driving force for our relationships with the Greek Orthodox in San Francisco.
Good. The other thing about San Francisco, and I don't think this is probably news to you, but it's a profoundly secularized city. And one of the things that certainly as Pope and also as Cardinal that Benedict was concerned about was the loss of God. That it's the quite striking and historically speaking, sudden loss of God in many places. He didn't want to react to that just by lecturing the world, however, that he seemed to want to invite people back to the person of Jesus Christ. That seemed to be the center of what he was about. Does that inform your work there in San Francisco?
Certainly. Pope Francis emphasizes a lot about this culture of encounter, but so did Benedict. He emphasized that our faith is not a series of doctrinal propositions, but it's an encounter with the person. So he emphasized that living encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. Of course, that encounter is mediated through the human encounter, which Pope Francis emphasized. And I think that's how, if we talk about evangelization, that's how it has to. There's no getting around the personal encounter if we're going to touch hearts with the gospel message of Jesus Christ. So that certainly does inform a lot of what I do in my ministry as the Archbishop of San Francisco.
His concern, it's been speculated, why did he take the name Benedict? And certainly the prior Benedict XV, I'm sure had some influence on him. But I think that's also the sense that he wanted to reach all the way back to Benedict of Nursia, I think, in the original evangelization of Europe, because he wanted to emphasize that, Europe has really led the world in losing the Christian faith, and that he wanted to not give up on the modern world, the modern secular world, but to somehow embrace that world and kind of do a critique from within it, one that wasn't a critique of, oh, we're over here critiquing you, but from within to say, I'm a modern person as well, but Christ belongs to me and can belong to you.
He certainly was consistently calling Europe to its Christian roots, to recover its Christian heritage, which built up the great civilization that it did. And I agree with you about why he picked the name Benedict. I think it was mostly influenced by Benedict of Nursia. If we think about what was happening in the church and in the world at the time, it was at the end of the Roman Empire. Everything, civilization was collapsing. There was a lot of corruption in the church. And Benedict was very disillusioned with what he saw in Rome. So really the process of rebuilding civilization and then building it in a Christian way. In Europe, it began with Benedict, with forming the monasteries. And it's the monasteries, really, that rebuilt civilization and built up this Christian civilization, a civilization with God at the center, as you were saying earlier, and imbued by Jesus Christ. So I think he probably saw our world in a similar situation with the loss of God and needing to rebuild. And so I would imagine that, yes, but Benedict XV also, given what happened in the world after the aftermath of World War I, there was also, we see a significant step in the direction of the loss of God then as well.
Benedict XVI has been a particular inspiration to you, Your Excellency, with respect to sacred music, right? And you've founded this institute named for him, correct me if I'm wrong, for the promotion of sacred music. Develop that for us.
Yes, for sacred music and sacred liturgy. So I named it after Pope Benedict because he's made such a great contribution to the church in this area of beauty and liturgy, and especially with sacred music. And so I wanted to do something practical to recover this beautiful patrimony we have of the sacred art in music and reverence in liturgy. But I think music is really at the heart of it because it just animates so much of our worship. And there's so many treasures we have in that area. And Benedict was calling us to that, and he helped us to, I think, acquire a much deeper understanding and theological understanding of the liturgy, not just something mechanical, but its roots, its biblical roots, and the theological significance of it. So he's been such a great inspiration to me, and I know many others in that area. And I think this will be one of his major legacies, is his call for us to recover the sacredness of our liturgical and artistic tradition.
And of course, he was a musician himself.
I believe so. He was a pianist, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
If someone wanted to know more, Excellency, about your work with respect to sacred music, where would they look?
Yes, thank you. They could go to the website, benedictinstitute.org. to find out the latest. We're commissioning new masses. The first one became very quite well known now, the Mass of the Americas, even in the secular world of classical music. It was for 2 weeks, now last year, mid last year, it was number one on the Billboard charts.
Was it really? Well, congratulations on that. That's Frank.
Frank LaRocca. Frank LaRocca is a composer.
Frank LaRocca, yeah, a wonderful, wonderful composer.
So the idea is, so again, this is inspired by Pope Benedict. We're commissioning new masses of sacred music they're contemporary in the sense of they reflecting contemporary themes, but they're in the tradition of sacred polyphony, so they have a certain timelessness to it. I often compare it, it's being done musically, what the Franciscan missionaries did here in California visually with the mission church architecture. You know, when they were trying to evangelize the indigenous population here, they didn't just celebrate Mass in camps and leave it at that. They built churches. Mm-hmm. They built traditional Catholic Church, but it also reflects the culture that's here. And they had to use the materials, obviously, the adobe bricks for building, but kind of the colors and the whole style of art. It was a real enculturation of the gospel. And so it's an architecture of a certain time and place, but it also has a timeless beauty to it because it's within continuity of the tradition. So that's what we're doing with the sacred music. So the Mass of the Americas, with the popular devotional song Starling Guadalupe, the Requiem Mass for the homeless, conveying sense on the streets through sacred music. So these special themes, but they're also in the tradition of
We have to take a quick break. The Archbishop of San Francisco is our guest, and we're reflecting on the life and ministry of Pope Benedict XVI. We'll continue that, and we'll give a little announcement right after this. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and Merry Christmas to you, because we are still in the Christmas season here. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone is our guest from San Francisco. He was appointed to San Francisco from San Diego. I only say that because, of my profound love for the Diocese of San Diego. But Archbishop Cordileone didn't know this. We just told him at the break, and I probably should have waited to tell him on the air and gotten that reaction on the air. Yeah. But he was chosen by our radio club members and our Society 315 members as the Catholic person of 2022. So we will go back to discussing Pope Benedict, but I didn't want to deny you the opportunity to accept this very high honor, Catholic Person of the Year.
Yeah, I want to assure you, Excellency, this does not come with a cash prize.
Or anything else.
Any size. Maybe a decent bottle of Napa Cabernet or something.
Well, thank you so much. It's quite an honor for me. It really does come as a surprise. So I'm grateful to you, grateful to all the listeners for confidence in me. And please...
You're an inspiration.
Well, I'll tell you, it'll be even a higher honor when I tell you this. The year before, the winner was Father Mike Schmitz. So you are up there in the pantheon.
Yeah,
now,
that's there.
I mean, you've never done Bible in a year, but you've had a lot of other fine accomplishments, Archbishop.
Excellency, all of our guests in the previous hour and in this one have had an opportunity to address the question which is coming up in all the obituaries on the favorable and unfavorable ones, but the undeserved names, the rat, God's Rottweiler, Benedict's reputation for being sort of a cold German theologian, and all the, which don't really accord with the personality of the man at all.
I mentioned earlier about having had an opportunity to interact with him earlier when I was a priest. I was in graduate studies, and I was living at the Casa Santa Maria, the residence for American priests, graduate studies there. One of the members of the house invited him to speak to us. So that was the first time I saw him personally and heard him speak. And I was just stunned at how different he was from the reputation and the public perception. It was the complete opposite. A man of graciousness and humility. He listens well. He's just like the diametrically opposed to the public perception. And he's a man of great worth. too. So it's quite, but he has a brilliant mind, and he understands that there is nuance. Not everything is black and white. Some things there are gray areas, and he understands that. But there's also some things are black and white, and so again, the sense of clarity, the light he could focus on that. But with an ability, a compassion, an ability to listen and understand was truly remarkable.
This kind of caricaturing of him, though, however, as a kind of dark personality, it does seem that you yourself and many of the leaders of the church are you represent something publicly that is quite threatening to some in this who have more secular agendas, and so this kind of comes with the territory for you guys, and by that I mean Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, yourself. You have to deal with the fact that you're not going to be treated with kindness in every news story. You're going to be caricatured sometime, don't you?
Well, sure. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing to be stereotyped that way, but I think it's most of all happened with Pope Benedict, and he also doesn't have that kind of personality that's real forceful. That can kind of break through filters, because he is more on the humble side. But yes, that does go with the train. And I think to stereotype him that way and cast this as the image of him does serve a certain agenda. And I can't help but think that as at least partially is cause for that sort of false stereotype of him.
Yeah, indeed. What did you make of? I mean, you're there in Rome, Pope. You've got these really historic churchmen, really, between him and John Paul II. It's really an extraordinary moment to think. We've lived in a time of people such as this is really quite extraordinary. What did you make of their partnership?
Oh, I thought they were a good complement to each other. And it was just such a great blessing for the church, and for me personally, God gave me this great privilege to have a front seat and all of that. I arrived in Rome for my theology studies in the seminary the day before the installation of Pope John Paul I.
Wow!
So I was there for his death and his funeral. I was in the piazza when John Paul II was elected Pope. I was able to meet him and interact with him on a number of occasions. And then, as mentioned here, Ratzinger speak, and then as a bishop, interact with him when he was the Pope. So God really gave me a front seat, and I saw the great vision and depth of these men, and especially their understanding of the Second Vatican Council, what it really means, and how we have to read it, and what it doesn't mean. And so I saw them really with great minds and great pastoral outreach, getting the church back on a track of an authentic reading of the Second Vatican Council in light of the continuity of the tradition.
And there were real battles, though, in those years in the late 1970s, throughout the 1980s. Maybe that's where some of the God's Rottweiler stuff comes from. But they did have to stand firm in the face of enormous pressure.
Oh, yes, they did. But these were men who were honed at a very dark time in the history of
in their own
Europe.
nations, yeah.
Yes, with the communism and Nazism, the National Socialism, and the Second World War. So that world, it was a world of great suffering, but it produced some very strong leaders, and were the beneficiaries of that.
Well, do you have anything that Pope Benedict wrote that you say, well, if you really want to know the mind of the man, go to this? Is there a favorite that you've got?
Well, it'd be a toss-up between his trilogy on the Jesus of Nazareth series. I think that demonstrates very well his depth of insight into Scripture and his ability to communicate it in a very accessible way. Of course, a lot of us also look to as kind of the Bible for our liturgical guide as his spirit of the liturgy, which again, so much in depth into the liturgical traditions and why we do things the way we do, what the theological meaning is. So I would say that those two would be
the trilogy of Jesus of Nazareth and then Spirit of the Liturgy, the great work on liturgy. He wrote Introduction to Christianity. I don't know who he thought he was introducing to Christianity. Like, you have to have a theology degree to understand it. It's hard, but it's like, did you have that sense, Archbishop?
Yes. Yes, I think that was meant more for an advanced theological audience.
Yeah, like you better have gotten an introduction before this.
But it was also earlier on in his career as well, and I think probably over time he developed that ability to communicate it to a wider audience.
So for you, you have the Benedict XVI Institute, and we'll give out that information again, because I do think people should know it. I really hope everyone will listen to the Mass of the Americas and hear the fine work that's being done there, in honor of and inspired by the work of Pope Benedict XVI himself, to renew liturgy in a genuine way that wasn't just let's do what they were doing in the 16th century, but was let's recover the full power and beauty of the liturgy for the modern person. You said you thought that would be his legacy, that's kind of what we'll, in the long run, really appreciate about him.
Oh, it was certainly one of them. Maybe the great, not the only, but the greatest. Because I find this curious irony that in the secular classical music, the great orchestras play the great symphonies of the great composers. They continue to play Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms, and their new compositions as well. So the same thing should apply for sacred classical music. The Renaissance polyphony is beautiful in every age. It doesn't get outdated. But there can also be new compositions to add to their tradition. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with the Benedict XVI Institute. And yes, I thank you for saying that. Everyone should hear the Mass of the Americas to see what can be done, especially those who are familiar with Our Lady of Guadalupe traditions,
Yes.
because they'll hear that music and those themes woven all throughout. And so it really is a sort of a Marian unity effort. They can find more information on that at the website benedictinstitute.org. We also find that we try to teach chant too to children. I mentioned during the break our friend Marianne Carr Wilson that does chant camps.
Right here in San Diego.
Teens, and I tell you, it forms a Catholic soul in those young people, and they're going to be Catholic for life now, and they love it.
Yeah, that we have certainly learned that here, where our president, sitting next to me here, Chris Check, has encouraged us in the praying of the hours, that the church's liturgy, but the chant, the chant that the church, that comes out of the heart of the church, is formative. It forms the soul, and you're right that those people will be Catholic for life, that are formed in this music. So thank you for the Pope Benedict XVI Institute, but also Archbishop Cordileone, thank you for taking this time to remember Pope Benedict with us.
Thank you for having me.